Simon and Simon made detective work look like family. 8 seasons, 2 brothers, 1 mother who held them together. 2 of this cast have since died, and 1 survivor was nearly murdered on his own doorstep. Here is what became of every single one of them. We start with the brother in the cowboy boots. Rick Simon lived on a boat parked in his brother's yard, drove a truck with mud caked on the tires, and trusted his own gut over any file sitting in the office. Gerald McRaney played him with a slow Mississippi burr and a loose physical ease, the kind of man who leaned in doorways and let a grin do the work before his fists ever had to. Half the pleasure of the show was watching him needle his straight-laced younger brother, 2 men who shared a last name and almost nothing else. Audiences took to Rick because he felt like someone they already knew, the rough older sibling who would bend a rule to do the right thing. The truth behind that performance was a working man with dirt under his nails. Born in Collins, Mississippi in 1947 to a builder father and of Scottish and Choctaw ancestry, McRaney found acting only after a knee injury in junior high pushed him toward the school play. He studied theater for a single year at the University of Mississippi, then moved to New Orleans and paid his rent the hard way, working the Louisiana oil fields and the offshore rigs out in the Gulf of Mexico before he ever chased a camera. His private life turned on a luncheon in the mid-1980s, where he met the actress Delta Burke. She guest starred on Simon and Simon before the 2 of them married in 1989, her first marriage and his third after earlier unions with Beverly Root and Pat Moran. The marriage became the steady center of a restless career, and they have been together every single day since, well past their 36th anniversary, raising a family that includes 3 children. By every account he has ever given, marrying her was the smartest thing he managed to do. He has long credited her as the steady reason all of it held. Then the body that had played so many tough men turned against him. Late in the 2000s, McRaney was diagnosed with lung cancer. He went through the treatment, he came out the other side of it, and afterward he started telling anyone who would listen to get themselves checked early. The scare did nothing to slow him. He led Major Dad as a Marine officer and produced it himself, headlined Promised Land, played the patriarch Johnston Green in Jericho, the Gold Baron George Hurst in Deadwood, the ruthless Raymond Tusk in House of Cards, and an admiral on NCIS Los Angeles. And he finally won a Primetime Emmy in 2017 for the gentle doctor on This Is Us, who broke an entire audience in a single episode. Here is the quiet irony of the man. He played Marines on 2 different series and lawmen in dozens of roles, yet he never served a day in uniform himself, and his Mississippi hometown still marks his birthplace with a street sign that carries his name. Rick Simon trusted his gut and never once bled for it. The man who played him rough-necked on oil rigs, beat a cancer that should have ended him, and learned that a real life keeps no such guarantees. The second name belonged to the cool head in the squad room. Lieutenant Marcel Proust, downtown, Brown, a working cop's name with a French novelist tucked inside it, was the brother's line into the San Diego police, the man who could hand over a procedural fact and a dry joke in the very same breath. Tim Reed played him with an unhurried half-smile, the calm professional who had watched these 2 amateurs walk into trouble before and fully expected to watch it happen again. Reed arrived at that role by a road almost nobody else in the cast had traveled. Born in Norfolk, Virginia, in 1944, he took a business degree from Norfolk State and started out, not as an actor, but as a stand-up comic, one half of one of the first black and white comedy teams in the country, working the clubs alongside Tom Dreesen. That partnership ran straight into the ugliness of its era, drawing real hostility and real threats in rooms that did not want to see a black man and a white man share a stage, an experience the 2 of them later set down in a 2008 memoir called Tim and Tom. Viewers who came up a little later knew him first as the smooth disc jockey Venus Flytrap on WKRP in Cincinnati. What he wanted, and what he rarely got, was a real say in how black characters were written. He created and starred in Frank's Place, a show the critics adored and the network killed after a single season of 22 episodes. The work won an NAACP Image Award and earned an Emmy nomination, and still the doors kept swinging shut. So rather than wait for Hollywood to change its mind, he built his own answer. In Petersburg, Virginia, he and his wife opened New Millennium Studios, the only black-owned film studio the country had seen since the 1930s. That wife was the actress Daphne Maxwell, whom he married in 1982, and she became a second mother to the two children from his first marriage to Rita Sykes. He directed his feature debut, Once Upon a Time When We Were Colored, played the adoptive father across the long run of Sister, Sister, fronted the detective comedy Snoops with his wife, and surfaced years later for a new generation on That 70s Show. He also took a seat on the board of a Civil War museum in Richmond. At 81, Reed is still working, still directing, still living in Virginia. Downtown Brown answered to the department and carried a borrowed badge. Tim Reed answered to no one, and when Hollywood refused to build him a place, he simply went home and built one himself. Stay with this, because one of the two brothers at the heart of the show would later be shot twice by a neighbor on his own quiet street, and the man who pulled the trigger went to prison for 9 years. Number 3 was the only person alive who could stop both brothers cold. Cecilia Simon was the still center the two men circled, the mother whose arrival in a scene could end an argument before it fully started. Mary Carver played her with a warm directness and a knowing lift of the eyebrow, a woman who clearly loved both sons and was just as clearly unimpressed by either one's nonsense. She lasted all 8 seasons, the only face besides the brothers to go the entire distance. Long before any of that, she was a Los Angeles girl with a story that sounds like old Hollywood itself. Born Mary Carvelas in 1924, she graduated from Hollywood High School and Los Angeles City College, and as the story goes, she met Joan Crawford at a luncheon at Musso and Frank's Grill. Crawford, struck by her poise, helped open the door to the movies, and Carver went on to appear in From Here to Eternity, to play the mother of Goldie Hawn in Protocol and the mother of James Woods in Bestseller, and to turn up everywhere from Gunsmoke to The Twilight Zone to Star Trek Enterprise. She even met a memorable end on the big screen in Arachnophobia, her character among the many felled by a single spider bite. On Broadway, she carried serious dramatic weight in The Shadow Box, and she had first stepped onto a Broadway stage years earlier in Out West of 8th. Her marriage carried its own quiet story. In 1952, she wed the director Joseph Sargent, the man who would later make The Taking of Pelham 123, and together they had 2 daughters, Athena and Leah, before divorcing in 1968. Leah grew up to become a working voice actress, carrying the family trade into another generation. Carver died on October 18, 2013, at her home in Woodland Hills, at the age of 89, after a brief illness. Her family announced it quietly in a Los Angeles Times notice and asked that anyone who wished to give send the money to the Motion Picture and Television Fund instead of flowers. Away from every camera, she had spent years teaching young actors in the theater department at the University of Southern California. Cecilia Simon existed to hold 2 grown sons together. The woman who played her spent her real years teaching strangers' children how to act, and let her own quiet exit slip past with barely a headline. The 4th face on the list had broken ground long before she ever reached this set. Temple Hill moved through the brothers' world with an easy, polished assurance, and Daphne Maxwell Reid carried her that way for a simple reason. She had already conquered a different industry first. Raised in New York City and born in 1948, she graduated from the Bronx High School of Science and went to Northwestern on a scholarship, where she became the first African-American woman ever named Homecoming Queen. She started modeling there, signed with the Ford agency, and then put her face somewhere no black woman's had been before, on the cover of Glamour magazine. That single image rewrote what a national magazine cover was allowed to look like. Marriage brought her into one of the most durable partnerships the business has produced, when she wed Tim Reed in 1982 and became stepmother to his children. A son of her own, Chris, came into the household from an earlier marriage to Robert Tubbs. Most of the world, though, knows her best as the second Aunt Viv on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, a role she won against 200 other women who wanted it. With her husband, she co-owned the studio he built, and she has kept working steadily since in films like Harriet and A Jasmine's Blues, and in the dramatic Bel-Air reboot, while serving on community boards for a ballet company and a children's charity. 27, she is still an actress and a photographer and a designer, and she released a brand new book in 2026. Temple Hill was only ever a guest in someone else's story. Daphne Maxwell Reid had already put her own face where no black woman's had ever been allowed, and she kept breaking new ground long after the detective show went dark. The next man married the same woman for nearly 50 years while playing characters nobody on screen could stand, and you have heard his voice close a beer commercial more times than you could ever count. That voice belonged to number 5. Myron Fowler ran the rival detective agency and treated the Simon brothers as pests to be outsmarted, and Eddie Barth gave him a deep, gravel-bottomed rasp that made every complaint sound like it came up through cigar smoke. The industry simply called him Mr. Gravel. Myron was never written to be loved, and Barth seemed to take real pleasure in that fact. Philadelphia native born in 1931, Barth built his living as much on that voice as on his face. He played a police lieutenant on the 1973 version of Shaft, and had the show lasted past one short season, his whole career might have run a very different way. Instead, he became one of those faces that turned up everywhere, on Murder, She Wrote, and Night Court, and Civil Wars, and the film Fame, with a regular role on the crime drama Stone, and a voice that turned up in Babe, Pig in the City, Osmosis Jones, and Superman, the animated series. Few performers ever worked more while being recognized less. He married Sally Hada in 1961 and stayed married to her for nearly 50 years, right up to the end. Theirs was the kind of long, unflashy marriage his on-screen heavies never seemed to manage. He left behind Sally, his son Victor, a daughter-in-law, and a grandson, a steady family quietly running underneath all those scheming screen heavies. Barth died of heart failure at his home in Los Angeles on May 28, 2010, at the age of 78. His family planned no service and asked for donations to the Actors Fund, or a children's charity instead. The strange thing is how many people grieved a sound without ever once knowing the name behind it, because that gravel rasp closed the Miller Lite commercials of the 1980s, promising everything a person wanted in a beer and less, thousands upon thousands of times. Myron Fowler schemed in plain sight and got remembered as a face. The voice that played him did its finest work unseen, selling beer to a whole country that never learned the name attached to it. These are the faces a lot of people grew up with. If you happen to be one of them, take 1 second to subscribe before the next name, because the rest of this cast earned the same careful telling. Number 6 on the list played the law. Assistant District Attorney Janet Fowler could spar with the brothers over a legal point and soften into warmth in the very same scene. The prosecutor and the romance rolled into one. Jeannie Wilson gave her a bright, composed confidence and the easy carriage of a former pageant competitor, a woman who plainly enjoyed being the sharpest mind in the room. Week to week, she gave the show a counterweight, a legal mind who could push back on two investigators who preferred to improvise. Wilson came to acting from a world of sashes and stages. Born in Memphis in 1947, she competed as Miss Texas in the 1968 Miss USA pageant, and she also did something none of her castmates did. She earned a college degree in nutrition. That second credential would matter far more than anyone watching could have guessed. She had been married once before, to Louis Dorfman, and since 1980 she has been married to the actor Jack Lucarelli, a union that has now outlasted her screen career by decades. Her resume held a regular role on the action series Street Hawk, a turn captaining the squad on the short-lived sitcom Stir Crazy, guest spots on Murder, She Wrote, Santa Barbara, and Full House, and a part in Jackals, a film both Simon brothers made together before she returned for the Simon & Simon reunion movie. Then she did the unexpected thing. She stepped away from the camera almost entirely and put that nutrition degree to work as a consultant, choosing a quiet professional life over the endless chase for the next part. At 79, she lives well out of public view. Janet Fowler prosecuted criminals in a courtroom every other week. Jeannie Wilson left the law and the lens behind for a kitchen table profession that nobody watching would ever have guessed. And here, finally, is the brother this whole story has been circling. A.J. Simon was the buttoned-up one, the brother in the tailored suit and the vintage convertible who reasoned a case out where Rick would rather kick the door in. Jameson Parker gave him a soft, precise voice and a held-shoulder restraint, the college man forever one beat away from losing patience with the chaos around him. The audience trusted A.J. because he looked like a man who had read the rulebook and fully intended to follow it. The life underneath that polish started far from any badge. Born in Baltimore in 1947 to a foreign service father, Parker grew up moving through the capitals of Europe and claimed he attended 10 boarding schools in 13 years, thrown out of 2 of them. His first paying break was a breath mint commercial, which carried him onto the soap Somerset, and then a long run as the original Brad Vernon on One Life to Live, a daytime heartthrob years ahead of his time on Tuesday nights. From there, his path ran through John Carpenter's horror film Prince of Darkness, opposite Donald Pleasance, and a guest turn as a corrupt cop on Walker, Texas Ranger. In June of 1992, he married the actress Darlene Carr, younger sister of Charmian Carr, the Liesl of The Sound of Music. The marriage was barely 3 months old when the thing happened that nearly ended everything. On October 1, 1992, Parker learned that his new wife had argued that day with a neighbor, a man named Robert St. George, in a dispute that traced back to something as small as a dog. He drove over to St. George's home in Studio City to settle it face to face. St. George met him with a gun and shot him twice, once in each arm, and Parker ran home bleeding into the street to reach a phone and call the police. The man who had solved a fictional crime every Tuesday for 8 seasons had just survived a real attempt on his own life. St. George was charged with attempted murder, and a court sent him to state prison for 9 years. Parker lived, but the life he returned to was not the one he had left. He and Darlene walked away from Los Angeles for a horse and cattle ranch up in the California hills, where he learned to work livestock and wrote a memoir about the long recovery called An Accidental Cowboy. The book dwelt less on the gunshots than on the man he became afterward, and the fear did not leave him quickly. The ranch made him a cowboy in earnest, and the business that had made him famous seemed to interest him less and less. He reunited with his old co-star one final time for the 1995 reunion movie, then stepped back from acting almost entirely by 2009. At 78, he lives the quiet, rural life he chose deliberately after the city nearly killed him. A J. Simon caught the bad guy and walked away clean every single week. The man who played him caught 2 real bullets on his own doorstep, then answered by trading Hollywood for horses and never really looking back. Sit with this one for a moment. A man who played a detective for 8 years was shot on his own street by a neighbor over something as small as a dog. If that reveal stopped you cold the way it should, say so down in the comments. The last name on the list is also the youngest of them all. Lieutenant Abigail Marsh stepped in as the brothers' contact inside the department for the show's final stretch. A no-nonsense officer who held her ground against 2 private investigators who loved to bend the rules. Joan McMurtry gave her a clipped authority and a watchful steadiness that helped ground those last 2 seasons. Born in Homewood, Illinois, in 1958, McMurtry made her television debut in 1985 on Scarecrow and Mrs. King, and stepped almost immediately into the pilot of Moonlighting, arriving on Simon & Simon as a relatively new screen actor with a deep stage foundation already underneath her. That foundation turned out to be the whole story. She built a serious theater career at houses like the Mark Taper Forum, the American Conservatory Theater, and the Old Globe, winning San Francisco Bay Area Critics Awards for her work in Creditors and Man and Superman. On screen, she appeared opposite Kevin Costner in the thriller No Way Out, held recurring roles on soaps from The Bold and the Beautiful to Shark and the Young and the Restless, and turned up as recently as the 2020 film The Glorias. At 67, she teaches the craft now, an acting professor at the Savannah College of Art and Design, handing it down rather than chasing the next series regular contract. Lieutenant Marsh barked orders and kept the peace for 2 short seasons. Joan McMurtry left the badge behind for a classroom and now passes the work to students who never once saw the show. 8 faces from one fictional detective agency. 2 of them rest in the ground now, 6 are still above it, and every badge among them was only ever a prop.